Intangible, speaking for the unspoken. Born in Michigan, July 24, 1969, she looked to the stars as a child and discovered more than comfort in the silence. Abuse creates the recluse, and her environment made her run. September 23, 2022, it stopped her in her tracks. She had collected enough puzzle pieces, and her time to make the intangible tangible was now upon her. They only make statues of crazy people. I'll take that challenge. Just as there are readers and writers, there are the religious and the spiritual. What some may call God, consciousness, universe, or true self, I call it life. From divine predictions to bilocation and everything in between, life leaves clues to guide us on our journey. I recall choosing this lifetime, knew it would be difficult, but knew it would be worth it. Within is the best place to be. Here is my story. Operating room. It was October 1991, 20 hours of labor, plus 4.5 hours of pushing by me, and long after they had screwed a monitor into the baby's head to keep track of the vitals, the anesthesiologist came in to prep me for a C-section. Dr. Nieto had been so patiently helping me for hours, pulling during the contractions with a suction cup on the baby's head. It moved a little, he sighed. Let's try one more time first. I knew he was talking to the surgical team that had gathered and were waiting to take me in the operating room. My body was beyond exhausted, and I cried, no, I just wanted to sleep. Do the C-section, please. But the nurse assured me I didn't want that, if possible. Everyone was so nice, and she knew my entire body was spent. During the next contraction, she did what I'd never seen or heard of before and started pushing on the top of my belly against the baby's bottom, literally helping me push the baby out. The doctor pulled from the other end with a suction cup in hand, and I gave one last effort with all that I could muster from within me. It's a girl, he said, then placed her white-coated slippery body on my chest while he stitched me up from the episiotomy. He then cut the umbilical cord, and the nurses quickly took to caring for my daughter. As the doctor and team were wheeling me on the gurney into another room, I felt my insides wanting to contract again, so I inhaled deeply into my belly, pushed just a little, and quickly felt my bottom get warm with hot liquid. Someone lifted the sheet on the right side of me. They didn't say anything about it, but the doctor stopped the gurney and told me I had two choices, but the placenta needed to come out immediately as I was bleeding out. It would involve him going in with his hand to carefully scrape it out, and he could either do it immediately or put me under with anesthesia. The team was already there and ready to accommodate. I told him, I'm so tired, I just need to sleep. In that moment, having a baby never even crossed my mind. In the operating room, the anesthesiologist administered the injection, and as I felt my head start to swirl, he asked me to count backwards from 100, 99, 98, 97, 90. There were about 5 or 6 people around the table with lights shining down at what they were doing, while I looked at them from above. I had no idea what they were doing and was seemingly disinterested. As I started backing farther away, I turned my focus and started drifting down the hall of what I can only describe as the hospital above. Down the corridor, I came to a T intersection where another hall went to the right, and on the other side of that was a nurse's station, just as one would expect to see in the hospital below. There were 2 people behind the desk and one walking down the hallway to the right. All was quiet. Then I was approached by who I believe was a head nurse. She stoically said, "You don't belong here." My head turned to face her. She was taller than me, but then I'm only 5'3". I didn't say anything, nor did I have any thoughts, as I seemed to be in a lucid daze, quite similar to my sleepwalking experience. As if knowing what I wasn't asking, she said, "You don't belong over here." As if knowing what I wasn't asking, she said, "You belong over there," and pointed to where I came from with her outstretched left hand. My eyes glazed down her arm and then in the direction it led. I saw the outer walls of the room below where I had just come from. There was no ceiling of the below and no floor of the above. and I could see the outline of the tops of the walls that created the room the people were in. Void of curiosity, I compliantly headed to see what they were doing, and as instantly as I entered the world above, I left it. I woke with a dry mouth and a tube down my throat, which was promptly removed for me. I was advised they almost lost me on the operating table and had sent a blood transfusion permission request to my husband, but the transfusion never happened. Knowing him, that did not surprise me for a number of reasons. At the same time, I was recalling my conversation with the nurse above and presumed that's when I came back here from her world. My daughter was slightly jaundiced, so they kept her under lights for a few days, and Dr. Nieto signed insurance paperwork that allowed me to stay in the hospital bed versus sending me home while she was treated. We both went home 3 days later, which worked out best for me because instead of being there for either of us, he was out getting intoxicated with his friends. Marriage and kids. Around age 11 or 12, I recall standing in our driveway talking to an extended adult family member who didn't have any kids. He asked about my thoughts on getting married and having kids one day. My insides immediately jumped up and firmly responded, I don't want kids and I don't want to get married, but if I have kids, I'll have a girl and a boy. They asked, why not a boy and a girl? I knew people always wanted a boy first, bigger and stronger to protect the little sister. I told him, matter-of-factly, the girl would be strong enough to protect the boy. In March 1991, at age 20, I told my boyfriend I was pregnant. I was more than fed up with his choices before, but we had lived together while he pretended to go to school. The sex was fun, and, well, that happened. Since we didn't really get along otherwise, and knowing how his very traditional Republican family was, I told him I would just leave. Nobody would question it because after the last couple years, everyone knew we didn't get along. I suggested I could move to Kentucky since I love horses and waitress. I wouldn't put him on the birth certificate so he wouldn't have to worry about child support and he'd never hear from me again. I felt it was the best option for both of us given the circumstances. Then he asked me to marry him, and again, knowing it was his family's reputation he had in mind versus the situation at hand, I told him no. I would figure out my plan soon and execute it. A week later, at his parents' house, he announced to them, we're having a baby and getting married. I was shocked to hear any of this come out of his mouth. His father's face instantly turned red with anger, and he stepped even taller in front of us and said, you're not bringing a bastard child into this family. First, I was irritated my boyfriend even said that, when that was clearly not what we had discussed, and I was angry his dad called my baby a bastard, but I didn't really expect anything else from him. My head was spinning. I needed to run and couldn't. He drove there. I hate being trapped. The following week or so was Easter at his grandparents' house. You do not miss a holiday in that family. They keep tabs and remind you. I had hoped his father had calmed down and we could just enjoy being there. I would deal with disappearing afterwards, I told myself. Shortly after walking to the door, his mother, aunt, sister, and grandmother gathered around and sat down at the kitchen table made for two. I walked over to see what they were doing, as this wasn't normal for them, and I was curious. I was glad I did. They didn't plan to include me. Each had pulled out their pocket calendars and started flipping through the pages. There wasn't much said, but they all agreed on a date 6 weeks out. I wonder what they're getting together for, I thought to myself. That's when they started talking about my wedding, as if I wasn't standing there watching them. My head began to spin, my chest was stirring, and again I was trapped. I rode there with him and didn't have a key, so I couldn't leave. This is a big reason why I have driven myself everywhere since. I asked myself what I was going to do now. They are literally planning a wedding for me, right now, that I clearly do not want. How is this happening to me? What are my options? I pleaded with myself. My options appeared as 1, my own highly abusive family to raise this baby around, 2, his family, who were completely ignoring me standing next to them, or 3, by myself. Given the short 6-week time frame and thinking what would be best for the baby versus myself, I opted to allow them to do as they chose and hoped he would be the father I had always wanted for myself. Maybe this will work out okay. I might not like it, but there are worse options and I need a plan. 6 weeks later, with very little input from me, they designed, planned, created, invited, and put on a wedding and reception, impressive enough for their respected guests. My head was still spinning. I hated him. I hated him for not standing up for either of us and allowing this to happen. But he's a mama's boy with an apron string still attached. What did I really expect out of him? He did what he was told to do. Keeping in touch with the money was his main objective, and he'd bragged to me about how he'd buy stuff for his hockey team on away games with the credit cards his parents let him borrow. I wanted nothing from these people, but it was a decision I chose, so here we go. In October 1991, I had my daughter. The marriage itself was not fun, as his own anger, resentment, cheating, beating, and narcissistic ways grew, and I was who he took everything out on, including lying to our mutual friends about me and lying to me about things they said. How do I know? Andrea and I talked about it, comparing the stories he told each of us. I could only imagine that's why other mutual friends stopped hanging around me also, but whatever. Just get him away from me, I said to myself. As far as the abuse, if you can imagine it, he did it. And a couple years later, that's how I got pregnant with my son. For my birthday in July 2000, I self-filed for divorce. No attorney. His father was a prominent attorney in the area, and I learned plenty on the workings of attorneys and the court systems. The friend of the court is aptly titled, as it's no friend of the people, no matter how they market it. It's a business, like anything else. The court made us wait until January 2001 to finalize the divorce. I wanted nothing from him except out. I never wanted to see him again, just be on my way, but the court advised that wasn't an option. Even though the divorce was final, I still had to take him back to court because he wouldn't allow me to list the house for sale, which forced me to continue living with him and his ways. Only making $8.50 an hour and paying all the bills, I needed the house to sell so I could get out. I didn't even have money for a deposit elsewhere. I told the judge the neighbor guy was a realtor and had offered to list it for me, but he wouldn't let me. The judge ordered him to let me list the house. It sold within 2 weeks. In May 2001, I was finally out. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the last of his behavior I'd have to deal with.